Good afternoon, class. We are going to pick up where I left off today, and I was about 3/4 of the way or so through a presentation that was designed to help you hopefully absorb some of the key aspects of what the German concentration and extermination camps were like, how they were organized, some of the basis upon which they were put into operation, so that we can better appreciate this moment. One of the real stark lessons that's drawn from the World War II experience is, of course, how genocide on the scale at which it's practiced by the government of Nazi Germany is one of the real sobering realities of World War II, and it's also a reality of our modern world. And so we want to try to understand it as best we can and think about it a little bit in the way it acted. Here we have a very sophisticated plan put together for the purposes of very dark purposes. In class, you'll recall I mentioned that really there were 3 phases to the Holocaust. And again, I tend to refer to the Holocaust as something that involves both the Jewish and non-Jewish minorities who existed throughout Germany and Europe as a whole. And really the efforts by which Adolf Hitler and his government, the efforts they undertook to quote-unquote purify Germany and Europe were things that did not just target the Jews, although the Jews seem to have a special place in Hitler's anger and in his evil designs for this, what became known as the final solution. So anyway, the 3 phases, we talked about isolation in the early days. The isolation which was sort of evident in the Nuremberg laws, where Jews were forced to self-identify their ethnic affiliation. Of course, the Nazis didn't think of it as an ethnic affiliation. They spoke of it as though it were a racial designation, which is not in fact true. But nonetheless, this was part of the way in which the Nazi government was able to turn attention and sort of levy disgust by Germans as a whole against some of their own people, the people who lived amongst and worked alongside them. So in the second phase, concentration, and then the third phase will be extermination. But here we are in concentration. We talked about this briefly, and it was evident the typical lifespan once you arrived at a concentration camp was probably 6 to 9 months. Generally speaking, the extermination camps were a much shorter duration. As their names would suggest, the camps that were located in Poland and farther east of Germany existed largely for the express purpose of exterminating and destroying the people who went there. Concentration camps were generally different in the sense that you would work for a time before you would then be essentially gradually killed over time. The similarity, of course, is that when people were shipped to concentration camps, there oftentimes were large groups among them who were determined to be too weak or ill-fit for labor. They might be put to death in a very sort of a fast-tracked way. Okay? But a 6 to 9 month life expectancy generally once you arrived at a concentration camp. Extermination camp would be much more quick. Now, extermination happened at both extermination camps and concentration camps. And in the case that I'm presenting you with, sort of in this somewhat first-person example, if you were in a concentration camp, if you had been shipped to a place like that in Dachau, which is in southern Germany, in Bavaria, province of southern Germany, the slow process of your eventual demise and your eventual expiration would begin, but it would be taking place over the course of months. And I just want to note, as many of you already know, that the German regime, the Nazis, were also using in many cases using these people as a resource, in some cases for their labor, where they would work to help produce things that would help serve the German war effort, but then also the resources of their bodies, things like their hair, on another level, the gold that was in their teeth. They would take their clothes and recycle them for the German civilian population. In some cases, they would even use things like the bones, the human remains, so on and so forth, for various purposes. So this was a highly organized, highly intentional affair. It's also worth noting that some of these people in these camps, they were used as science experiments. The German medical industry and science industry, whereas it's unethical to conduct most experiments on living human beings, German doctors and German researchers had very few qualms or very few inhibitions about subjecting humans as very useful specimens for observing the cause and effect and the consequences of various medical procedures, and also exposure to various chemicals, temperatures, so on and so forth. So humans on some level became lab rats in Nazi Germany. Okay, so now Auschwitz is a extermination camp, and it would have been possible that some of the people could have been shipped from Dachau to Auschwitz for their final stop. Again, this came to Germany compliments of the final solution. I mentioned in class that it wasn't necessarily known exactly where the effort to quote-unquote purify Germany, where exactly that was going or how it would end up. But by 1941, high-ranking leaders in the SS and also affiliated with the Einsatzgruppen, which is a special branch of the SS, largely tied toward carrying out this final solution. They determined that they were going to make some changes and fast track and expedite the process of removing Jews and other undesirable, quote-unquote, undesirable ethnic and social groups from Germany. Now, Auschwitz was a very sophisticated place, extermination camp, and you'll see here this is the gate that greeted people as they entered into Auschwitz, and it said here in German, "Work makes one free," which of course would lead one to believe that this must be a work camp, but in fact it was a extermination camp. So part of the psychological way in which this was presented. They used Zyklon B, which was a hydrogen cyanide, a chemical that the research wing of the Einsatzgruppen realized that there were morale problems, that if they had their men continue to essentially put people to death by firing squad, put people to death in a way where they were making eye contact with their victims, that this had all sorts of consequences, negative consequences for the morale of the German soldiers. So they quickly changed their strategy to a chemical strategy, which of course tended to insulate the German soldiers from the hardship and human dimension of what they were doing. Auschwitz, when running at its most efficient, at its full capacity, had the capability of putting to death 20,000 people in a single day. So if you think about that for a little bit, that's essentially a town of Walla Walla. Town of Walla Walla's worth of people every day. They did it in an incredibly efficient way with crematoria that would burn and remove almost all evidence of human human death in a very short period of time. So Auschwitz is, incredibly, in many respects, a very modern phenomenon, but of course it's that modern, sophisticated development being used for some of the least desirable aspects of the human spirit. So all the way through to spring of 1945, the concentration and extermination camps were running. In fact, we have strong evidence toward the end of the war effort. Bear in mind, Hitler is engaged essentially in 2 wars in World War II. He's, 1, engaging in a war of German expansion and domination over the European continent and in the world. And then 2, he's engaging in a war to transform the character of German civilization and German society by removing people that he has determined are a detriment to his rule and his power. On the first front of world domination and expansion, Hitler almost succeeds. He doesn't quite do it. On the second front, however, all those things, the Holocaust, it's difficult to argue that Hitler didn't accomplish almost all of what he set out to accomplish. But anyway, what starts to happen by late 44 and early 45, the Allies start to realize just the full extent of what Germany has been doing. Bear in mind, the way that Germany structured its camps, it really did. It was a one-way flow. So there wasn't a whole lot of information. There was a suspicion that people were being put to death or being treated very poorly. But there wasn't a full understanding that these people were, in fact, being exterminated. Some thought maybe they were being held in camps and so on and so forth. But this starts to become more and more evident by late 44, early 45. And in the spring of 45, just as it becomes evident and all but certain that the Axis powers are in fact folding, it elevates the race to Germany, to liberate Germany. And we'll talk about this tomorrow in class. It was actually sort of a foot race because even though the United States and Soviet Union had been working hand in hand to bring about Germany's surrender, they were also wary of one another and distrustful. So they really did literally foot race into Germany because everyone knew that however far they made it at the conclusion of World War II, that was where the post-war negotiations were going to be happening. Long story short, the U.S. and British troops tended to liberate the camps, the concentration camps in Germany itself, whereas the Soviet Union tended to liberate most of the extermination camps in Poland and beyond. And when they finally found their way to these camps in the spring of 1945, people couldn't believe what they saw. The emaciation, the conditions under which these people were living were all but just astonishing. And in fact, there were a lot of instances where even the people that were being liberated, there were efforts to not portray them quite as badly as they were, like to wait a couple months and try to healthen these people up, give them food, give them vitamins so that these Holocaust survivors didn't look as horrific as they did when the soldiers found them. Anyway, there are also instances we refer to as canned good killers. That was a nickname given to the Allied forces, the soldiers, because of course when you see an emaciated person, your first instinct might be, oh, they need food, let's give them a bunch of food. But the sad truth was that these people their stomachs had in many cases shriveled up to the size of about a thumbnail, and when you suddenly provide a bunch of nourishment to such a shrunken stomach and innards and internals that have been so stressed, it is not a good thing. So that's just one little interesting side story. Okay, so I've already essentially mentioned this. The numbers on the final solution, roughly 12 million. That might even be a conservative. People think that probably 4 to 6 million Jews were killed in the Nazi Holocaust, and probably 4 to 9 million non-Jewish enemies of the state or minorities of the state that Hitler found objectionable. And so this, of course, is grounds for tremendous pause. And I think what I'll do is I will talk a little bit about the fallout and the lessons, just to make a couple points about the lessons of the Nazi Holocaust. I'll save those for the beginning of class tomorrow. Thanks for listening, and I will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Bye.